Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. If this is your first time listening, welcome. And thank you for taking the time to check out the show. If you've been here before, welcome back and thank you for your loyalty. Either way, it's important to let you know that this show is a safe place, primarily for victims and survivors of rape and sexual assault. But I also, on occasion, invite victims and survivors of other types of interpersonal violence, such as domestic violence and familial assaults, because sharing our experiences is an important step in our personal healing journey. This platform is also devoted to explaining what it means to be trauma-informed and how important it is for each of us to know and understand the critical aspect of treating victims and survivors with a non-blaming attitude of belief, support, and empathy. This is episode 109. Which is part 2 of a multi-episode compilation of the life stories and experiences of my guest, John Carey. John is here because he is fully on board with the mission and goals of this podcast, helping to bring justice to victims and survivors of rape and sexual assault, as well as to normalize this type of conversation. Today we pick up with where we left off in last week's episode. Here's John.
This is the part where I start going into the abusive sexual type stuff. I started recognizing it when I was young, like 6, 7, 8. My brothers have their friends over and they'd be playing a board game in the living room on the floor or something like that. And my mother would find it necessary for some reason to come in and start picking up stuff in the living room and bend over slowly and pick stuff up. And you can't be that unaware of yourself. And my brother's friends would giggle, and then my mother would go away, and I would be left like, what just happened? What was that? Why did she do that? She shouldn't be doing that. When I was just little, I'm thinking, she shouldn't be doing that. Why is she doing that? But she would basically expose herself to young boys, and it was gross and disgusting, and I hated it. And I knew that boys talked about it, and that my mother was odd. Well, did she do that to you? And stuff like that. I would hear boys talking and they would giggle. And so my mother was clearly not well. And like I said, she probably never received any help for all the situations she had been through with everything. She was basically alone. She didn't really have friends. There was no girlfriends hanging out. She had 2 friends. There were these 2 odd sisters who lived in an apartment together, and they would come over once in a while. One of them had mental health issues, and the other one worked and took care of the other one. But she really didn't have regular visitors. She didn't have any sisters or brothers or parents and anybody to take care of. She wasn't friendly with the neighbors at all, other than saying hello. And she was a different personality outside. She would giggle and she would say hi sweetly and stuff to people. But at home in the house, she was very dark. With Debbie gone, my dog was gone because my mother sent her to the pound, and she was only 8 years old. That dog could have lived a quite a long while longer. My mother told the pound that my dog had been biting people but never bit anybody. There was a brother who was older, and he had a health problem, mental. I don't know how to say this, but he was a curious child. My parents always treated me badly after their head injuries. They just really seemed to regret me and my brother, who was a year older than me. I think apparently because my brother, a year older than me, was from another man. I never, ever saw my father talk to my brother, Brian. Not that he talked to any one of us, really. There was just dead silence. And I would see him look at Brian, and it was just an interesting observation that the way he looked at my brother. One of my brothers was aware of how much my parents and my mother would say stuff out loud in front of my brothers, like if just he wasn't born. And I didn't know until I was in my 30s that I was being blamed for her losing her voice and damaging her lung and never being able to sing, and which is ridiculous because you can't blame a child for that. So she really just didn't like me. And so my brothers kind of took up on that. When your parents are like that to you, it kind of gives your siblings also reason to adapt that. Maybe also because they want to protect themselves because they don't want to get treated like that. So they adapt the parents' behavior toward you. There was a point where I was 8 years old, and there was a car in our backyard. We had this old car, and my brothers broke off the side mirror when they were playing basketball, but I didn't know. I saw the mirror laying on the ground next to the car, and I picked it up and I brought it in the house to tell my mother. And I barely spoke to this woman, but I said, somebody broke the mirror off the car. And she just got so angry. And my father overheard me and he got really angry. He's like, he came in and who did this? And it turned out where my mother arranged it so that the mirror would be there and that no one would know that it got broken. And she didn't want to upset my father because my father's anger issues were extreme. He got really pissed off and he left and went to the bar, I guess, to get drunk or something. I eventually learned that he would also go to the horse races and just spend his days betting. He left, and then my mother came in the room and she was hitting her fist. One day I'm going to get you. And I'm 8 and I'm looking at her standing above me, punching her fist into her palm, saying, one day I'm going to get you. She was pissed off because I guess I spoiled their plan of who knows what their plan was because the mirror was broken. I thought I was doing good by bringing it in the house and saying that, but apparently not when your mother's warped and the situation's bad and dad has an anger issue and we're poor and in poverty and any kind of money expenditure just isn't good. My brother started telling other kids that they could do whatever they want to me because my parents didn't care and they didn't want me and they didn't ever want me. They wanted a girl and he's not a girl. But he would say stuff like this because my brothers hung out with some pretty bad kids because none of the good families in the neighborhood wanted my brothers around. Families would even tell me, you could come around, but we don't want your brothers around. I understood why. That's just something that started happening was my brother would tell people, other boys, that it was threatening and scary when I'm several years younger than him and these boys are several years older. And it's clear that my mother's not healthy or normal. There was also the situation where, well, I didn't know until I was 24 that I had kidney disease. I was born with deformed kidneys. The tissues are really thin. And in my adult life, I've had 4 kidney surgeries. When I was young, my brothers found out that if they hit me in the side, I would cry. Then my mother would be angry because I was crying, stop crying, you little baby. And my father, the same thing. And not a good situation for a little boy to be in. People finding entertainment and making him cry and be in pain. But there was this one time when we were going to Niagara Falls. We couldn't afford vacations, but we were going to go to Niagara Falls and we were leaving early in the morning and going to Niagara Falls and driving all the way back all in one day. I had to sit in the back seat with my brothers on each side of me. And they started both hitting me in the sides and it was so painful. And I started crying. And then my mother's stopped crying and my father's, why is he crying? And she's, he's a prince. He doesn't like to be touched. And which, okay, if you're maybe a deranged lady, you could think like that. But sorry, I'm going to call my mother names because, her behavior was out of control. Then I knew I had to cry silently, and my brothers thought that was funny to try to make me in pain and try to see if I could cry without making any noise. But that was a miserable trip. There was another time where we went to the beach. It was like a chilly Sunday afternoon, and my mother wanted to have like a family outing with all of us to try to maybe pretend we're normal. We all got in the car and we went to the beach, and it was a cold Sunday afternoon, not the kind of day that other people would be at the beach, but we were walking on the beach, and my father took off with the other brothers and they're catching a football and stuff. And I started climbing on the lifeguard station with 2 of my brother, who was a year older than me, Brian, and this other brother. And I'm trying to get up to the top and my brother pushes me off. I fell several feet down onto the concrete and hurt myself badly, was bleeding. It hurt really badly. And I went up to my mother and blood's coming out of my arm. And she's like, get away from me. And I'm like in pain and I'm bleeding. She said, go to the car and just wait by the car. And she said, you ruin everything. I had no choice. I wandered off and went to the car. There's actually a photograph that I have that my mother took of the other family members, and I'm wandering away toward the parking lot. So I have a picture of that. So I'm waiting by the car and trying to hide, and I'm crying because I'm bleeding and I don't know what to do. And this other family came and they're getting into their car and they saw me, and I just went around to the other side of the car to try to hide. And this couple came up and they're like, what's going on? Where's your parents? And at that point, my parents and my other siblings were coming toward the car. And this couple starts asking my parents, like, what do you need to take care of your son. He's bleeding. And all of a sudden, my parents said absolutely nothing. And they just told my siblings to get in the car. And this couple just looked at my parents like they're horrible people. And here I was just not knowing what to do. And I'm like, uh-oh, this is not good. And we go home and it's just silence. And I ruined it again. My mother was livid. I didn't know what to do. I was in a bad situation. There were so many things that happened. Another thing is I was trying to learn how to ride a bike. We all had secondhand bikes, or my brothers had pieced together bikes from other bikes and broken bike parts. And there was a smaller bike, and I'm like, oh, I could try to figure out how to ride this thing. Nobody was around except my father was drunk, drinking a beer on the porch, and I'm trying to ride this bike. And I saw him coming up to me. I'm like, oh, no. I knew it wasn't good because I knew he was drunk. He grabs the handlebars and he's running beside me and he's like, pedal, pedal, pedal. And pedals are like hitting me in the legs and like cutting my legs open. And I got him to stop. And then he just picked me up on the bike and threw me into these bushes and was walking off. And this man across the street saw, and he's like, you can't do that to a child. And my father just kept walking away. It's like, oh, my legs are bleeding. I pulled the bike out of the bush and I'm just trying to walk it home. And I knew this isn't good. Oh boy, my father just got yelled at because of me and it's my fault. And I get home and he whipped me with his belt. And I would get mocked and ridiculed and called names by my parents. So my brothers adapted that. And I was just like this problem child. So being hit and ridiculed and kicked and randomly punched and stuff was just a constant. And I often had so many bruises. When I was in third grade, I was always getting really bad grades. I didn't know how to read barely at all. And there was this one time where they're going to fail me, and my father would yell at me for my grades. He'd stand above me while I was trying to do my homework and he'd punch me in the head. Like, that's not the right answer. I'd try to write something down. He'd punch me in the head. I'd go to bed and my head hurt so badly that I would try to find a place on my pillow where I could sleep without the pain. People abuse children. They know to hit them where the bruises aren't going to show, I think. And I was more and more aware of how my family was just out of control. And I saw how other families treated each other, and it wasn't the same. It wasn't my experience. There was my oldest brother, never spoke with me my whole childhood. He was this problem boy and very strong and regretful. And he would randomly punch me starting when I was like 7, or kick me or shove me against the wall. If I got too close to him, punch me in the middle of the chest hard. Sometimes it would crack and it hurt so bad. And sometimes you would do it like numerous times in a month. Or sometimes the pain would start going away. I'm like, oh, I just always try to avoid him because he was always angry. He was a sadist. For 5 years of my childhood, I was always so afraid that he was going to punch me in the chest again. And I spent years with painful chest, the center of my chest, and it probably cracked it. I don't know. There was this teenage boy in the neighborhood who I didn't know what he was doing. I knew it hurt and there was blood and I didn't understand. I was 8 years old and I hated it and it was dreadful and I didn't know what to do. And I hated talking to my mother, but I didn't know what to do. And my father was impossible. I never spoke to him. He never spoke to me. And I went to my mother and I didn't know the words to say of what was going on. I didn't understand it. And I thought when people said dick, I thought they meant stick, dick, you know what, like stick. And I thought it was like a form of the same word when I'm 8 years old. And I didn't know what it was called anyway, because nobody ever talked to me about my body parts or anything. I went to my mother and I said, these two boys, they won't leave me alone. They're doing stuff with their stick. And she just looked at me like, what is he trying to say? And she's like, just kick him in the chins and leave me alone. Just go away. Like, she just didn't even want me near her. And I'm like, but it's this one boy. He's like 16. What's an 8-year-old going to do? And I'm trying to tell her, but I don't know the words to tell her what was going on. I didn't have any aunts or uncles. There were no cousins. There were no grandparents. There were these two brain damaged parents. One's an alcoholic who's barely ever around. And then my mother who just hated everything. And she's depressed and she needs help. And I found a book that was upstairs in the hallway. There was this bookcase and it was a book of what you learn in each grade, like what you learn in first grade, what you learn in second grade, what you learn. And I was trying to figure out how old I was and how many years I had to keep living until I was an adult and move away from these people. So by age 8, I was already like, I just want to get away from these people. Because I got fascinated with talk shows by the time I was like 8, 9, 10, because it was like adults talking about their lives. And I'd like to stay watching Johnny Carson or during the day, Merv Griffin or these talk shows and hearing people just talk about their lives. So I knew there was an outside world going on, but here I am stuck. I'm 8 years old. I'm trying to look through this book and I could barely understand. I couldn't read very well. I couldn't retain. And I'm already planning. I got like 8 more years or whatever. And here I am, this upset child, stuck in childhood hell. I heard a story of a famous person who was on the radio. Some famous person OD'd on drugs and died. I'm 8 years old and I'm listening to this. So I knew there were pills in the cabinet in the kitchen, and I would see my mother take these pills every day. I don't know what she was taking. Who knows what she was taking? One day, everybody was gone except for my father was in the room drinking beer, watching TV. I don't know where my mother was with the 2 daughters. My brothers didn't seem to be around, and it was this dreary day. I went to the cabinet and I took all the pills. I know there were like vitamin pills, there were iron pills, there were prescription pills, there was aspirin, but I took them all. And I'm 8. And I just wanted to die like the person I heard about on TV. And then I started feeling sick and I didn't know what to do. And my father's in the living room watching sports, drinking beer. And I couldn't talk to him. I went to the bathroom. My parents' bedroom was on the back of the house and they had a small bathroom with just a sink and a toilet. And I went back there and I was so sick to my stomach and I threw up. And I was like, oh, it just felt gross. And it was such a dreary day. I went into the kitchen. I'm just like standing in the kitchen, not knowing what to do. And I heard my father walking and I was like, oh, he's going to come in the kitchen. He's going to get another beer. And he came in there and I turned away because I didn't want him. I felt like I was going to cry and I didn't want him to hear me cry or anything. I didn't want to have anything to do with him. But he came in and I knew he was going to go to the refrigerator and I turned the other way. And then for the first time ever, he tried to console me like he obviously knew something was wrong. He stopped and he goes, oh, come on, it can't be that bad. He was behind me and he grabbed hold of my shoulders and I just kind of squirmed away from him and I left. I went up to my bedroom and just like, I just couldn't. By that time, I was not into being touched. I never got hugged. All touch was all anger touch, or by that time, rape touch. That's the only touch I knew. Or getting hit on my sides to make me cry touch. And all the touch I had experienced was all ugly and I didn't want him touch him. I just squirmed, or I don't know what he ever thought. Who knows? So I felt so much anxiety and I can even feel it now, just like my brain was going to explode with anxiety and fear. I hated my life. I hated what the boys were doing to me, these teenage boys. I hated that it was going to happen more, that I was going to have to put up with it, that I didn't have anybody to help me, that I was stuck growing up like this, that like I had, according to that book about classes, what you learn in 8th grade, that I had like 8 or 9 years left and I hated my life. And I had turned 9 and I didn't understand why I was so hated or being what I now is called raped. I didn't understand that, why these boys were doing this to me and several times. And the next day I was in the kitchen and I saw my mother looking in the cabinet, looking at the empty pill box. And she just seemed to be like wondering where all the pills went. And I didn't say anything. I often, because of what was going on, I would hide. I would hide in the basement. I would hide behind the sofa. There was this linen closet upstairs where I would go and hide on the top shelf. And I knew that I could never let anybody see me go up there. And I would just spend hours up there and then know that when I came back out of it, I would have to make sure that nobody saw me. And I shared this bedroom with this brother who wasn't liked and didn't talk. One time I went out on the roof outside the bedroom window to look at the stars. I loved looking at the stars. My brother shut the window and he wouldn't open the window. So I went, there was a little there was the flat roof above my parents' bedroom, which was what I was on. And there was this little porch outside the back door of the bathroom, which was an odd design. But I went to the porch to get into the back door of the bathroom. And I went to the door, but one of my brothers was in the bathroom. You couldn't really see the toilet, but he leaned over around this wall and saw me at the window. And then I got accused of, he came out all outraged and I pounded on the window. I went back to the window and pounded on the window. And I heard my father yelling in the bedroom downstairs, like, what's going on up there? And my brother opened the window and let me in. And then the other brother who thought I was spying him in the bathroom, which no, wouldn't interest me. But he came in and he starts punching me. And then my father comes upstairs and starts yelling at us. Ugh. The next morning, I went downstairs. This is really warped. My mother's all pissed off that I got my father upset. My brothers are talking to my mother in the kitchen. I don't know what they're saying, but they all looked at me like they were all frustrated. And three of my brothers grabbed a hold of me and started dragging me into the dining room. I grabbed onto the dining room table. My mother's picking my hands off the table. Let go of the table, let go of it. And my brothers dragged me upstairs and ripped all my clothes off, which I guess was my punishment for spying on my brother, which I didn't do. And after that, my brother Brian and I never spoke ever again, even though we shared a bedroom until I was 16. So for several years, we shared a bedroom. We never spoke ever, and we never spoke ever again in our whole entire life. One of the teenage boys who was doing what he was doing to me, I always tried to avoid him. And my parents went there. I know they went Christmas shopping, which is like how joyous. We had a Christmas in our house. They were gone, and it was dark. It was December, and while we and my brothers were upstairs in their bedrooms, and this boy was there. One of the boys was doing things to me. And so I went to my parents' bedroom, and I was in the bedroom, and it was dark. I had the lights off. And then I heard that boy coming downstairs, and I thought he was just going to leave the house, but he came in to the bed, my parents' bedroom, and started trying to pull my clothes off. And he pulled his pants down, and he's trying to get it in my face. And I was wrestling with him and trying to get away with him. And while I'm wrestling with him, I heard the dog, this other dog we had that didn't like me, didn't take to me at all, avoided me, would bark at me when my brothers were attacking me and stuff. But the dog started barking at the door. So I knew my parents had driven up in the driveway. And I'm trying to wrestle this boy off. And he's got my pants down. His pants are down. Got into the dining room, and I'm trying to wrestle him. There's all this like furniture falling and stuff, and chairs falling. And my parents, I saw my dad walk in first and my mother behind him, and they both saw this boy attacking me, and our pants are both down. My father starts yelling, and the boy like pulls his pants and he runs out of the house. My father's like, "Who's that boy? What's his name? And he can't come in here anymore. Don't you ever let him in here." And I started crying. I didn't know what to do. And I just put my clothes back on and went upstairs. My mother, who was told by my father that that boy was never allowed in the house, started letting him allowed in the house when my father wasn't around. And I told her, "But he's not allowed in the house because Dad said." And she said, "But your brother only has one friend. He should be able to have one friend. And you just stay away from him." And I'm 9. It's cold. There's nowhere to go. It's middle of winter. He would come in. I would try to always avoid him. And I was pretty successful. But then one time, my father came home unexpectedly. And that boy was upstairs. And I knew he had to leave. So I sat in the dining room, just waiting to see what was going to go on. I was full of fear, and this wasn't going to be good. And I saw the boy come downstairs. He kind of tried to run past my father, and my father saw him. And she's like, "What is he doing in that house?" He started yelling at my mother. And she's like, "Oh, that's not him. That's his brother. They look a lot alike." And my father just looked at her like he knew she was lying, and how dare she do. And I'll never forget the look on his face. Like he was so offended by this woman and just didn't even seem to know what to do. And then she was told to not even allow the brother in, even though he knew that wasn't the boy's brother. And so she's like, he could come over, but he has to sit outside. And one day it's snowing outside really heavily. And she's like, "You're going to go with your brothers to go tobogganing." I'm like, "I know, I don't want to go." And she's like, "Put your clothes on. You're going to go tobogganing with your brothers." It was with this boy and my brothers. And my brother knew what was going on. They knew what was going on. And I'm crying, put on my clothes because I'm like, I don't want to go anywhere near this boy. It's dark out. It's cold. It's snowing really heavily. And I'm crying, and I go out, and instantly he starts like kicking me. I'm trying to pull the toboggan, and he starts kicking me. We get to the park, and he just starts beating the hell out of me and shoving my face in the snow and kicking me. And I got away, and I ran and got home, and my face was bleeding. And my mother, I couldn't even control myself. And then after that, he was banned, finally. But she knew. I always wanted to play baseball. The school started a team up, and we could join the teams and play baseball. And I started going to practice. My father started showing up in spring practice. Two of my brothers were on other teams, and my one brother had a best friend. The best friend was on the team, and they would make fun of me the way I threw. I'm at practice. I'm just trying to learn how to throw, and I got a baseball glove and I had a baseball hat. They gave us baseball hats, and it was really cool to be on a baseball team. I wanted to play baseball. Then the first game, our father shows up drunk and starts yelling at me on the side, like angrily. I'm just like trying to pitch the ball, and he's screaming at me. It's softball, and the other parents looking at him, what is going on? They start saying stuff to him, and he's yelling at me, and he stomps away because he's being told to calm down, and he marches off. I'm like, oh, this is not good. So at dinner, my seat was next to him. We always sat in the same seats. Even though we barely spoke, we'd eat dinner together, our whole family, but nobody really said anything. We'd just like eat. And my mother was paying attention to my sister who had Down syndrome on one side of her, and then my little sister on the side of her. And my father was next to me at the other end of the table. And I had to sit next to my dad, and he starts ridiculing me and telling me I throw like a sissy and you're an embarrassment to the family. I'm 9 and I don't know what to say. And I'm just trying to eat my dinner. And my brothers are looking at me like I'm a little asshole. And yeah, it gave my brothers even more reason, that, especially that one brother, to tell other boys like they could do whatever they want with me. And there was this one boy in the neighborhood who didn't sexually assault me, but he would come over and beat me up. And my brothers would watch. And I couldn't say anything because I was a little sissy. I need to man up. And I would try to tell my mother, but she wouldn't say anything. She's like, well, learn how to fight then. And this kid's beating the hell out of me. When my brother's watching, if I got away, they'd grab me and throw me back at him. It was just open season on me. There was this boy down the street. He was my age. He was kind of odd. He was a problem child in school. We were in the same classes. I barely had anything to do with him, but one time he asked me if I wanted to go down in the woods in the park. There was a park at the end of the street, a bit like 35 acres of grass and then woods around it. It used to be a farm decades before. So there was in the woods, there were apple trees and blackberry bushes and plums and pears. And I would go down there a lot by myself and pick fruit in the summer. And he asked me to go down the park with him. I dropped out of the baseball team. I didn't go back to baseball. He had matches with them. I'm like, what are you doing? We get to the woods and he starts trying to light this little twig on fire. And I'm like, you don't do that. I'm trying to tell him, like, don't, I'm leaving. And then an arm grabs me. These two 16-year-old boys grabbed me, tried to grab him. He runs away, take me to this diner that's on the other side of the park and the corner through the woods on the main street. And they tell the diner that they caught me lighting the woods on fire. They need to call the police. The diner calls the police. And I just turned 10. And the police come and take me and put me in the back seat. And they're asking me where I live. And I'm just all panicky and shivery. But I didn't do what they said. I didn't light the fire. And they take me, and my father's drunk in the living room, home alone. And they tell my father that I started a fire in the park. And then they leave. And my father instantly just starts beating the hell out of me. I still have a scar here on my chin, starts beating me. I start running up the stairs, but he's behind me, hitting me with the belt, and it hit my lower back, and it like got into my hip on the side. And I get to the top of the stairs, but when he hit me so hard on the center back, it hurt so bad that I collapsed. And he picked me up and he threw me down the hallway, and he starts kicking me, and I get into my bedroom as he's kicking me, and I get beneath the bed and I grab onto the springs beneath the bed. I'm holding on and he's trying to reach for me, but then he gave up. And then he kind of leaves and I heard him go downstairs, and I'm all panicky and freaked out. And there's blood. I don't know, because I didn't have a mirror in my bedroom, and there's blood coming out of my hip, my face, my chin, my arms and stuff. And I'm hurting everywhere because I was kicked and thrown and beat and whipped. And I take my clothes off down my underwear, and I could barely move. My back hurt so badly now. I was sitting on the edge of the bed in my underwear, and I heard my father coming back upstairs. And he comes in the bedroom and he says, son, and he never calls me son. He goes, son, I need to know if you have any other matches. I'm like, no, I don't have any matches. And he's like, take off your pants. Are you hiding them? I'm like, no, I'm not hiding them. I'm not. And he's like, take off your pants. I need to make sure you're not hiding it, which doesn't make any sense at all. I knew he was drunk, and it's just disgusting and weird and strange. And I'm bleeding, and the room's dark. The lights aren't on. I mean, there's some light coming in from the window, but that's it. And I start pulling my pants down. And when I stood up, there was blood all over the bed behind me. And he freaked out. He's like, what is that? What's going on? He just picks me up and he takes me to the bathroom and he puts me in the bathtub and turns the shower on. And there's like blood coming out. He takes me on, he puts me on the toilet. I don't know where the blood was coming from, but also I went pee and pure blood came out when I urinated. And he's freaking out. And the next thing I know, I was waking up in bed. So I must have passed out. But that would happen sometimes when I would get hit in the sides by my brothers. I would pee blood, but I didn't understand anything about bodily functions or anything. But I woke up, my eyes were closed, and I heard water dripping, like being squeezed into a big metal bowl. And I wake up, and my mother is squeezing a washcloth, and she's washing blood off of me. I didn't go to school the next day. And then the day after that, I had to get dressed. Get dressed, you're going to school. And I had the scab on my chin and a scab on my forehead. And I took forever to get ready because there was a bad cut on my hip. And when I put my pants on, I couldn't stand the pain of my belt on my hip. And I was still going to Catholic school. I'm in 4th grade at this point. So I layered newspaper and I put it on my wound and I tightened my belt so the newspaper was against this wound. And I went downstairs and my brothers are all evil eyeing me. Everybody thinks I lit a fire in the park and I didn't do anything wrong. And my mother tells me, now, if they ask what happened to you, you were in the back seat and your mother had to stop and she put the brake on and you hit the dashboard. And she had me repeat this. I didn't know what she was saying. She was so angry, frustrated, as if the family depended on it or something. And no, you were in the back seat. Your mother was driving. A car drove through the intersection and she had to stop really fast and you hit the dashboard. And I had to rehearse this with her over and over. And my brothers are watching this. And then 3 of my brothers had to walk me up to school and don't let him talk to anybody, they were told. And make sure he repeats this. Ask him again as we're walking to school. And so I get to school and nobody asks me anything. I get like side-eyed, glanced askance by the other students like, oh, what happened to him? The teachers never asked me. I get home, my brothers have to meet me after school and walk me home, and I'm not allowed to talk to anybody. And I get home and I'm told I'm grounded for 2 weeks. As far as I know, nobody in my family ever got grounded. And I'm supposed to stay in my bedroom and she'll bring up dinner. I didn't do anything. So every day I have to go to school, be walked to school and walked home by my brothers. If anybody asked what happened, but nobody ever asked. One day I came down to watch TV and my brothers saw me in the living room and went and told my mother that I came out of my bedroom. And she came in and yelled at me, was going to smack me, but then she stopped. She always used to smack me. And she stopped and go to your room. And I went to my room. But then eventually I was allowed to come down and watch TV. And I don't know where my father was. It was like he'd stayed away for a couple weeks. The good thing is he never hit us again. He stopped hitting my brother, who is a year older than me. He stopped hitting me. I don't know what that was about. Now I think I'm like, I wonder if he was staying away because the authorities might show up or something and my mother would handle it and tell her lie or something. I don't know. That's my imagination maybe. But eventually I went out to the porch one day. One of my brothers and his best friend went and ran and told my mother that I went on the porch. And eventually I was allowed to go on the porch, but I wasn't allowed to talk to anybody. Not that I had anybody to talk to, but I was always trying to be the best kid. I was the kid who raked the leaves. Nobody else did. I cut the lawn. Nobody else cut the lawn. I shoveled the snow. I dug the garden. I tried to keep a vegetable garden going. I would rake leaves and cut lawns and stuff for the neighbors and make money, pocket change. And then my brother would steal it from me. When I was even younger, I would go door to door with a wagon and ask neighbors if they had bottles I could return to the store. And I would go to the store and get change because you would get like 3 cents or something back then when you returned bottles. I was a good boy, but I was in a really bad situation. And sometimes I would clean the house, but she would get really angry. I wasn't allowed to clean the house. I don't know why. And my sister who had Down syndrome, who was 2 years younger than me, she would wet her bed every night. And sometimes the bedding wouldn't be changed for like 3 or 4 days. And it would stink. I went in there and I sometimes would change the bedding and throw the dirty laundry down the laundry chute. And my mother got really pissed off at me and I was no longer allowed to change my sister's bedding, which was gross because it would just get out of control and the house was filthy. And, my father really didn't go upstairs much. It turned out that eventually he got a job when I was in 6th grade at the steel mill. And so I guess he took showers at work because he barely ever came upstairs. So he didn't know what was going up there. And my brothers were always up in the attic with their friends, blasting rock and roll music, smoking weed and drinking beer and reading porn magazines. And sometimes my mother would go up there and clean everything and bring down bags of empty beer bottles and beer cans. And she would clean their bedroom and straighten out the porn magazines. Like, who would do that? It didn't make any sense. But I would also see my mother. Oh boy, here we go. I would see my mother look at the boys, my brother's friends, and she looked at them in a way that I thought was odd. Like she would check out their butts and stuff when they would walk through the room and didn't say anything. And like, why are teenage boys carrying six packs up to the attic without being told, no, that's not, don't do that here or whatever. It was just out of control. So my brothers, they did whatever they wanted. And so did I. There was a point, 1969, when I was just hanging out in the woods a lot with hippies who were going to Woodstock. There were all these hippies camping in the woods. And I was sitting around with them while they were smoking weed and talking about the Vietnam War. And there were these old drunk men who lived by the railroad tracks that summer. And it was kind of cool. I liked being around them than my family. There was this family that moved into the neighborhood and they had children. And I got friendly with them, but it felt like I was still an outcast. Like I knew I wasn't their family. And I felt like I had nobody, but I would see how they would interact with their parents and they would talk to their parents. This family was very argumentative with each other, but they liked each other, but they would argue, but they weren't like abusive. There was no kidding or anything. And I kind of hung around them sort of, but I was very aware that I was not of them. And I also felt like I was not of my own family, who seemed like they preferred I would simply vanish. One day I was down the park with three of the children from that family. And in the distance, the baseball coach and the baseball team that I was on, that I had dropped out of after my father threw his temper tantrum because I was throwing like a sissy, the baseball coach called me from a distance. And I looked at my friends and they're like, "Are you going to go over there? Who is that guy?" And I'm like, "Oh, I was on that baseball team." And we walked over there and he was handing out trophies to all the other boys, these little statues of baseball players. He stopped, oh boy, and he said, "This trophy is for you for putting up with your father." And he handed me a trophy. So I got a trophy for putting up with my father. And it was interesting to be told that in front of the whole baseball team, which was kind of cool in a way, but also really disturbing and sad and aggravating. And I like, "Can you help me?" I felt like I wanted to say something like, could you take me home and let me be your son? Because he sounded like a really cool guy, but I didn't say anything. I didn't even say thank you. I didn't know what to do. And I just kind of looked at my friends and my friends looked at me and then we walked away. But I had that trophy the whole time I was growing up. I was also such a lousy student that if I didn't go to summer school, I would fail. So for like the first 4 weeks or something of summer, I would have to go to summer school between third and fourth and fifth grades. And I think sixth and seventh. I wrote all this stuff down when I was young. I had to keep my journal in a hole in the wall because I was fearful if nobody could find that. I couldn't let anybody find it or know about it. But I would make lists because I couldn't really write paragraphs. So I would always make lists of like 2 or 3 or 4 words telling stuff. But eventually I started being able to write. I kind of liked summer school because I was away from the house and away from my brothers and away from my angry mom and my frustrated father and the filthy poverty household and the dog that didn't like me. Yeah, and the brothers really had nothing to do with me other than to call me names or mock me or ridicule me. So I didn't want to be around them anyway. And it was clear that they were drinking and randomly shoved me, or that just continued the whole time. From the time I was like 7, 8 years old. It was a game always growing up of listening and figuring out where people were in the house and waiting and timing it so I could go up or down the stairs without being on the stairs with them because they would shove me or kick me down the stairs. In the summer, after summer school ended, one day I was home and I used to make food. My mother was always depressed and I knew how to make food because I would see her make stuff from scratch, pasta and tomato sauce and hamburgers and meatloaf and cakes and cookies and salads and stuff. But we were very basic, like meat and potatoes kind of. They were Scottish and Irish, my parents. And we were poor, so there wasn't gourmet meals, but I knew how to make stuff. And sometimes she would be sleeping and I knew dinner had to be started. And sometimes I would start making food for the whole family on my own. And she really never said anything negative about that. She would finish it or she would start making it. And then sometimes she'd just be like staring at the dining room table. She stared a lot. And I'd be like, should I make pasta sauce? And that's our conversations. And I would say it really shyly because I was afraid of that woman. One time I was home during the day and it was raining outside and it was the summer after summer school ended. I was melting butter to put on the popcorn. I was only making enough for me, but I burnt the butter and I took the pan up. The pan was smoking and I took the pan up and I was going to pour it in the sink, but something was in the sink. And when I pulled the stuff out of the sink, it poured onto my hand, the boiling butter all over my right hand. That hurt. And the sound came out of my vocal cords at, extreme, really, really bad pain. And she was at the dining room table reading the newspaper, and all she said was, "What is it now?" And I was like, I burned my hand. I was already shivering, and I burned my hand on butter. She goes, "Put butter on it," because that's so dark. Anyway, yeah, she told me put butter on it, and there are already blisters forming. My whole hand mostly turned into a blister. One finger was one complete blister. My palm hurt worse than anything else. I just spent the next couple weeks trying to keep my hand cold. I would stand by the freezer with my hand in the freezer, and all these blisters formed and I couldn't stand being out in the sun. And there was this one day where I just couldn't stand it. And I was sat outside in a cardboard box on the porch with my hand sticking out into the rain and just hating how much pain I was in. I would go up to the supermarket and stand by the freezer section and kind of stand there with my hand in the freezer. People would look at me like, "Hey, there's a boy standing by the freezer with his hand. What is going on with him?" And I would hear them and I would walk out. I was never given any pain pills. There was no anything. I would put ice in a bowl of water and sit at the dining room table. And one day my father came home and saw me and walked past me. He's like, "What's wrong with his? Oh my, what happened to his hand?" And my mother's like, "Oh, he burned it." The way she said it, he was like kind of freaked out by the way it looked. And there was like raw skin and it stank. It started stinking. And at night, I just like couldn't stand the smell of it. It's amazing it didn't get infected. I should have gone to a doctor. I should have had burn treatments and stuff and pain pills. But here I was, this 11-year-old kid. My father was like, "Well, what did you put on it?" "Well, what do you mean?" And he told my mother to get him some lotion. And so the next day, you have to get a good night's sleep. Can't go to the drugstore. But the next day, she brought home some lotion and told me to put it on my hand. And to try to touch my hand so sensitive that trying to put lotion on it was agonizing. I went down to the park. In the summer, there was a park instructor, this teenage girl, like 19-year-old, who would be there for like 4 weeks in the summer with basketballs and stuff for kids to play with. And she'd have to take it on with her at night. But she would hang out in the park for like 5 hours a day. And if kids wanted to play with stuff, she would play with them. She'd have like coloring stuff for little kids. And I just started hanging out with this girl and she was hot. She was 19, beautiful. And I would go and sit with her. She would lay out in the sun because nobody would even show up. And she would just like spend her day laying out in the sun. And I sat with her and I would put my hand in my lap, but lean over so it was in the shade because I couldn't stand the sun on my hand. And she asked me one day, "What did the doctor say about your hand?" I'm like, "What?" It's like, "They took you to the doctor, didn't they?" And I'm like, "No." And she was like, "What do you mean they didn't take?" And so she went and talked to some parents in the neighborhood near the park. They told me to stay in the park. And then they walked over to my house. I was like 5 houses away, but I could see where they knocked on my door and then they were talking to my mother. And they were all kind of like pissed off and stuff. And then they came back and I went home and my mother was livid, just really pissed off. And I wasn't allowed to go down to the park for like 2 weeks or something. She made me stay at home. I could stay in the backyard. Don't talk to anybody. And one day she took one of my brothers and I to the Lake Erie to go swimming. And back then in the 70s, the pollution, it was just gross. But I kept putting my hand in bread bags tied with a line around my wrist. And I went swimming with my hand in bread bags. That wasn't good, but my hand started healing. But one of the blisters one day, this one blister, my ring finger on my right hand, lasted forever. And one day I was sitting with these neighbor kids on their porch who I just started really to get to know. And the girl was telling a story and she touched my hand when she said something funny, and my finger burst. My finger popped and the skin just hung, and it felt good. It actually was like, oh, she was all sorry. And I'm like, no, it feels good. It feels good. Like it finally, I was like, whoa, the final blister finally broke. And then my hand was pink for like 2 years. And I was called the boy with the pink hand. I mean, I'm laughing about it. I had a nickname. She was always telling me, don't talk to the neighbors after that. And I wasn't allowed, don't talk to the neighbors. If you want to go to the park, you go to the park, swing in the swings, and come home, which was, I already knew it was completely ridiculous. There was this other boy who lived several blocks away, but this boy, 2 years older than me, started talking to me one time when he saw me. And then one day he came over, he knocked on the door and asked for me. My mother answered the door, and then she called my name, and I came downstairs and he was at the door, and I went outside instantly. We're walking and he said, who's that lady? Is that your aunt? And I said, no, that's my mom. And he said, I'm sorry to tell you this, but there's something wrong with your mother. And I'm like, what do you mean? He said, she looks at me like a woman should look at a man. And I knew this because I saw my mother looking at other teenage boys this way, or even younger, but I didn't ever hear anybody say it out loud. And he was a good looking boy. I was in 6th grade, so he would have been in 8th grade. And he seemed way older. He seemed very adult. And he asked me if I wanted to go help him find his father, because he hadn't seen his father in a while. And he got bus fare from his sister to go see his father in a really bad part of town. And we took the bus to that part of town, and we couldn't find his father. It was a really bad part of town where like the windows were covered with plastic. And there was this boy in that neighborhood, and this boy 2 years older than me told me, watch, this boy's going to start telling us about Dinah Shore. And I'm like, Dinah Shore and Merv Griffin and stuff. And I'm like, what? And no, he's going to watch, he'll do it. So we started talking to the boy, and he said, yeah, he was several years older than us. And he's like, yeah, when I grow up, I'm going to have a talk show. I want to be like Dinah Shore and Merv Griffin. And we're like, wow, this is different. And he said, just like this boy told me was going to happen. It was Arsenio Hall. He was like 15 or something. And I met him years later when I moved to LA, and I was friends with him. He was living in his car and he was trying to be a stand-up comedian. But I told him, like, I met you when we were little. Well, I was little. But that was weird. I haven't seen him since then, since he was trying to be a stand-up comedian. But anyway, this boy, Teddy, asked me one time if I wanted to sleep over. And I had only slept over one time with this other boy. I knew other kids did it, but I did it once with this other boy in my school, and he seemed really immature. And his parents wanted him to have friends, so they asked him if he wanted to have one of his friends sleep over. And I wasn't really his friend, but he asked me. And it just was an odd situation. I never did it again. But then this boy, Teddy, asked me if I wanted to sleep over because he has the whole second floor of his sister's house. And I'm like, okay, another night away from my parents, family, good. So I went. He's inappropriate. We get there, there's one bed. And I'm like, where am I going to sleep? He's like, oh, we're going to sleep on the bed together. And I'm like, what? And he's trying to get me to do things with him. He wanted me to touch him, and he just wouldn't stop. And I touched him once, and I'm like, no, I'm not. And he's like, oh, do it more. And I'm like, no. He's like, put it in your mouth. And I'm like, no, I'm not. No, I didn't like, no, I'm not going to do that. Let's just go to sleep. And so I tried to go to sleep. I couldn't even sleep. And he held on to me like while he was sleeping, which was odd. I couldn't wait to get out of there. I couldn't wait till the sun came up so I could leave. I walked home and just slept all day the next day. But he came by and he's like, let's go walking. So I would go walking with him, but I wouldn't go anywhere with him. And then one day we're walking, and it's during the day, and he's asking me if I would go, and he needed to get something out of his house. And I didn't really want to go in there, but he was just going to I'm just going to grab something. And we go in there, there's 2 other boys, and they grab me. He's trying to get me to oral, and I wrestled my way out, and I got out, and I never went back. And it's like, how many times is this going to happen to me? It made me weary of being around people, and I spent more time alone in the woods and picking fruit and vegetables in the summer and drawing and painting in my bedroom.
That does it for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. Please be sure to tune in next week for part 3, the conclusion of John's detailed stories and experiences describing not only his abuses and sexual assaults, but also his healing and personal growth. To all of you who've joined us for this episode, thank you for being here. I hope that you will take just a quick second to give this show a rating and to subscribe to SAS. Every new subscriber and positive rating helps promote this show to others, and in turn helps bring justice to victims and survivors of rape and sexual assault. Thank you for your support. It would also be extremely appreciated if you would go to the new Sexual Assault Survivor Stories page on Instagram and click that follow button. Being an Instagram follower of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories also helps further the mission and goals of SAS and provides the opportunity for more people to have access to the site and to this show. Thank you in advance for following. I look forward to being with you again next Tuesday as I bring you part 3, the conclusion of John's amazing stories and growth. In the meantime, don't forget to start by believing whenever you encounter a victim or survivor who's reaching out for support in telling their rape, sexual assault, or interpersonal violence experience. Because we all know someone whose life has been impacted by rape or sexual assault. We'll see you next week.